So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. So this is the second webinar in our Younger Members Group Navigate Your Future series. So this series is dedicated to trying to further the skills, careers and experience for younger members, both within the Royal Institute of Navigation's members and for the community in general. So this morning's webinar is looking at how to plan for and get structured training and experience within positioning, navigation and timing, or PNT. So we have two speakers today for our webinar. We have Dr. Heidi Thiemann and John Pottle. So Heidi is the director and co-founder of the Space Skills Alliance. Heidi started with her first telescope aged 12 and was quickly hooked. She has a degree in physics and space science from the University of Leicester and a PhD in astronomy from the Open University. As well as extensive data analysis skills, she's passionate about education and training for the space sector. And she's been a mentor and organizer for Space School UK and led the development of space apprenticeship qualifications in Cornwall. And John started out as the communications engineer working in satellite communications and then moved to cover all things navigation related from 2002. A key priority for the Royal Institute of Navigation, for which John is the director, is to share knowledge and to build understanding, thereby stimulating insights and innovation. It's easy to say, but it's not easy to do in an area as vast as PNT and its associated systems and applications. So John's going to aim to orientate you and help to show you the key resources that he believes will be really useful, but that you may not know about. I should also point out that on the call today, we have Michelle Brown. So Michelle is one of the co-chairs, along with Wyron Bernard-Belinis, of our Younger Members Group. So if you have any questions about our Younger Members Group in particular, you can also feel free to pop those into the chat for Michelle. So I'm going to hand over to John in a moment. At the end of both of the presentations, we're going to have some time for questions and answers. So if you have any questions at all, please do pop them into the chat below, and I will ask John and Heidi the questions on your behalf at the end of the webinar. You can do so anonymously, or you can do so with your name. Any of that is fine, whatever you feel comfortable with. We are also recording this webinar, so you can watch it back later, and you don't need to feel like you have to take frantic notes. So I will hand over to John.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Claire, and nice to see everybody. Thank you for joining. So this webinar has been requested by our Younger Members Group, and our aim today is to share some information and give you a few tips and techniques that you might find useful. And in terms of structure, Heidi's going to kick off a little bit about the Space Skills Alliance and how to make a training and development plan. So there are a few tools there that I found quite interesting. I hope you do too. And then Heidi will hand over to me and I'll go through the scope of positioning, navigation, timing, which Claire has already hinted is absolutely vast. How on earth do you decide where to focus? And a few resources that I find really useful that I'd like to share with you, and then we'll move to Q&A. So Heidi, back to you.
Hi, John, and thank you so much to yourself and the Royal Institute of Navigation Young Members Group for having me today. So my name is Heidi Thiemann, and I'm one of the directors of the Space Skills Alliance. And we are a think tank and a consultancy working to try and tackle the UK space skills gap. And we do this mainly by collecting and publishing data, promoting and advising on best practice and good policy, and trying to bring people together to collaborate and learn from one another. So in my part of the session, what I'm going to whiz through is how to kind of structure a training or development plan for yourself and to make sure that you're actually in control of your own development. So I'm going to say next slide, please. So first question really is, how on earth do you go about creating a plan for yourself? Very quickly, first, assess your skills, find out where your strengths and weaknesses lie. What are your goals and objectives? Then when you know these two things, you bring them together, think about what time scale you're going to do them over, and then keep yourself accountable. But let's go into that in more detail, because I'm aware that is a massive jump into it very quickly. So let's go to the next slide. So first thing you're going to need to do is think about assessing your own skills and your skills gaps. So if I said to you now, have a think, write down a list of skills that you think that you have. How many do you think that you could come up with? Would it be kind of a very short list of 3, 5, maybe you can do 10 or 20 if you can, that's brilliant. But when I put people on the spot like this and say, what are your skills? It's actually really hard to think of what your skills actually are. You might write down a few kind of very standard ones like teamwork or communication or listening skills, or maybe some kind of harder skills like programming in a certain language or some systems engineering. But when we're talking about actually assessing your own skills and being critical of what you can do, that level of detail isn't quite enough. So what we really need to do is try and go into a bit more detail in order to start thinking about that plan and trying to kind of shape your development. So if you're identifying your skills and trying to assess your skills, what I'd really advise is think about how would you sell yourself when you're applying to a job? How would you sell yourself on a CV or a cover letter? If you think about what you do at the moment, you probably have a job or an area of study or a project that you're working on. So if you can think of one specific example, so a project you've been involved in recently, you probably have something you can immediately bring to mind and say, yep, I am doing this project and I've got some skills from it. So let's go into kind of a bit of an example here. So what I'm going to use here is an example from my time at university. And I'll talk through some of these points and how they kind of relate to different levels. So when I was at university, I remember being stuck in a warm laboratory with too few lights, spending weeks and weeks on this fault-finding activity for a coaxial cable with a team of other fairly bored undergraduates. Now, at the time, this project felt really dull. I didn't feel like I was learning many skills at all. But if I think critically about the scenario, what did I actually learn? Well, if I had to think, I was leading a team of bored undergraduates. So I was kind of doing some of this kind of level 7 stuff of setting strategy. I was learning soft skills, leadership, teamwork, patience, resilience, trying to get through this very warm, boring laboratory experiment. But I also learned a lot of technical skills, which are starting off at a lower level, but I was learning how to think about how to use a breadboard for electronics, how to use various pieces of equipment, how to teach other people in my team various kind of skills, applying some of that knowledge, how to calculate signal to noise ratio, how to identify and tell others what a good clean signal looked like compared to a bad noisy signal, how to actually safely handle electronics. So I know that's a really, really quick example, but it's an example of how you can think about a project which seemed at the time maybe a little bit pointless or boring or maybe unexciting, and pull out a really long list of skills that you can do. So you probably have a way more exciting project than sitting in a warm laboratory talking about coaxial cables. But if you can think of a project or 4 and 5 projects, write out that scenario, write out the list of skills that you think you gained from it, and write out what role you had in that project. You'll very quickly be able to build up a kind of evidence base of a list of skills that you have. So if you think about this in terms of assessing your skills or having a CV or a cover letter, you're always going to be trying to communicate to an employer, to another member of your team, I have these skills, this is why I should be brought into this project, or this is why I am the right person for this. If you've thought about these projects, you have built up that evidence bank, and you can very quickly whip it out for an interview, for a cover letter, for a CV, and it will also be really useful for assessing what your own skills are. But the next question that you want, and it's really kind of related to levels, is fine, you've got some skills, but how proficient are you at each type of skill? So having that really long list of skills can be very helpful, but it doesn't necessarily mean you know what you're good at or what you need to work on. So this is where you may want to map your skills to a scale. So up on screen here is something that I've shamelessly stolen from a fantastic resource called Sophia. It's a skills framework for the information age. And this is a competencies framework that lists out skills relevant to the digital world. There's loads of different competencies frameworks out there, but this one I really like because it's got different levels that are really clearly laid out as to the level of skill that someone might have. So for example, if we think about their data science, for example, their definition at a level 2, so a kind of assisting, starting to learn sort of level, is for data science, someone can, under guidance, apply given data science techniques to data. So if you think about the words here, if you're just starting off in your journey of learning a certain skill, you might be on a follow or assist or apply sort of level. You may be using someone else's knowledge or someone else's input to do something in your own work. But if you compare this to a level 7 definition, which is for data science, someone directs the creation and review of a cross-functional enterprise-wide approach for generating value from data science and analytics. You can see here that someone at a higher level is doing the setting strategy. They are really leading a team. They are very, very competent in that skill. So what you can do here is get a feel for the fact that someone at level 2 is someone who's just starting out on their skills journey, and someone at level 7 is a real leader, a real expert in that skill. So what I would say is, if you've got your list of skills that you've identified from the project, now take each skill that you've identified and have a bit of a think about what level you might be at. I'm not saying you have to do it for every list of every skill that you've listed. You might have a very long list, which is fantastic. But if you can do that for a range of skills that you've listed out, what you'll do is you'll very quickly have an understanding of where your strengths and weaknesses lie and the areas that you might like to improve and work on. And once you know what you might want to improve and work on, this can help shape the plan that you're going to build. Now I'll go for the next slide, please. And the next thing is thinking about your skills. You now want to know where you're heading towards. And I don't know about you, but I really, really like having something to aim towards, a goal. But the phrase goal setting for many people can be really quite nebulous. It's quite hard to know what a goal is, how big that goal should be, what timescale that goal should actually happen on. And the reasons for setting goals really varies for different people. So as I said, I'm really motivated by having something to work towards. Some people find that having a goal actually provides them with a sense of focus, and others find that having a goal gives them a sense of control over the plan or direction of development. But it's not just about motivation alone. You might be at the start of your career journey, you might be a student, you might be early careers, but eventually you're going to be aiming for quite senior positions. And roles like this are going to come with increased responsibility, not just for yourself, but for others too. So you're going to have the responsibility to advise and support junior members of staff in developing their own career goals and their own plans and push on through their careers. So if you can get goal setting right for yourself right now, you will also be able to help others down the line. And also another practical reason for setting goals is actually very simply, if you sign yourself a deadline, you're probably going to get it done, even if it's just at the last minute. So how do you actually set a goal? When I talk about setting a goal, what I really mean is making a conscious decision to do something. And it's a very purposeful process where you start with identifying an objective, making a plan for achieving it, and identifying a time over which you're going to do it. So if we take the scenario that we're all probably guilty of, is every year it comes to a year and we have a New Year's resolution where we say, I'm going to get fitter, learn a language, do something like that. But that's not really a goal. That's more of a kind of nebulous aim. And what we really need to do when setting goals is be a little bit more specific about what we want to do. So have these things called SMART goals. And you'll be very familiar with SMART goals, hopefully from university or work. But these goals should be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So if you take that and apply it to a New Year's resolution, rather than say, I'll learn a language, what you want to say is, I want to finish all 6 levels of Japanese in Duolingo by the end of 2024. And I'm going to do that by studying for 20 minutes a day. So that's quite a specific goal. You can measure the number of levels of Japanese that you're going to learn. Doing it by 2024 is quite realistic. Doing 20 minutes a day is quite attainable. And you've also given yourself a time-bound deadline. So when you're thinking about your goals and your career goals, apply the same process. Don't just say, hey, I want to run the country. Say, I'm going to run the country by this date. I'm going to do it by this method. And I'm going to do it with this political party. Make your choice there. So if we go to the next slide, there are a lot of questions now for actually how to plan your development. You've probably thought about assessing your skills. You've thought about some goals. And now you have to think about, actually, how do you get this down on paper? What are the benefits of doing it? How do you put some realistic goals? What are stretch goals? What are ultimate goals? There are so many things that you can really dig into and talk about. And we could talk in depth about all these things. But instead, I thought I'd show you a more visual way of structuring your development, which is a little bit simpler rather than me simply speaking at you. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And this is essentially a really simple and visual way of structuring your development plan, getting everything down on paper and making something that's really useful for yourself. So what this is called is a 5x5 grid plan, and it uses 5 themes to structure your development across 5 goals over 5 years. So if we start at the top, what we've done is have a sort of an ultimate goal, a nebulous sort of thing that you might want to do. It's otherwise known as a stretch goal. It's got a timeline of 5 years and it's fairly specific, but it hasn't got too much definition at this stage. But to achieve that ultimate goal, there are 5 overall goals, 1 in each theme. So I've got some examples here. So you might have a theme of expertise, you might have a theme of influence, you might have a theme of kind of work-life balance. It can be completely up to you. But these start to get a little bit more specific. But within each theme and each overall goal, you then break that down into small, achievable or realistic steps. So you kind of bring in some of that SMART goal setting within it. So that's where the detail comes in. So if we zoom in on the next slide, I'm going to take the theme of expertise. So in this theme, what you might do to achieve your ultimate goal is have a sub goal or a kind of sub overall goal, which is become a trusted leader in satellite mega constellations by the end of 2028. So what we would do to get there is identify a number of sub goals. These are the goals which are specific. You can measure them. For example, you can measure going on a training course. You can measure a 3-month secondment. They are realistic. They are attainable. They're time bound. And you can identify a whole range of different steps to reach this overall goal. And these normally follow in quite natural progression. So you might start on a training course, you might take that knowledge and share it with a more junior member of staff or your peers. You might then take that knowledge and do a secondment or a placement. You might then follow that up by presenting your results at a conference, and you might build all of that into a chartership status. So this is a really quick example, but it's where you can go into a lot of detail, and it's really where you can dig into what you want out of every goal. Now, this approach might not necessarily work for everyone, but it's something that you can start with and make your own. So instead of having a 5x5, you might want to go for a 3x3. So you have 3 themes, could be expertise, influence, and work-life balance. You could have 3 sub-goals, and it could be over 3 years rather than 5. Or you might want a more linear approach where you actually really hone in on just expertise, for example, and really focus on becoming an expert in your field. But the important thing is, what you want to do is whatever your plan looks like, you need to have goals which are SMART. Essentially, that is going to be the main thing that guides you. But I'm going to caveat this on the next slide by saying making a plan is entirely pointless if you write it out and you file it away and you never look at it again and you don't stick with it. So this is where it really helps to have some sort of accountability. So this could be I would say a squad of your peers. Maybe it sounds a little bit cheesy, but having a group of people who you see every so often, either your peers, people working in your field, your friends, people you can share the plan that you've written with, and they can share theirs with you, and you can provide support and accountability to one another. It might be a line manager, it might be a friend, it might be a family member, but it's just someone that you can trust who will every now and again get together with you and say, look, you said you wanted to do this course by this date. How's it going? Tell me about it. Equally, it might be that you want to tie the plan in that you've written with something that you're involved in, a project, volunteering, something in your workplace, meaning that you're kept accountable to deadlines no matter what. The point is, it doesn't really matter who or what is keeping you accountable, but have something in place that means that you are going to stick to your goals, because that will help motivate you. And equally, if you can be an accountable person for someone else, that will help motivate them. Another point is that the plan is also entirely pointless if it's so rigid that if you don't tick off a box and you don't hit some goal by that month, it makes you really anxious or makes you feel like actually the plan is pointless. What you should build in is a level of flexibility that if something happens, a life event happens, or something different, you go down a different career path, you can reassess your plan. You can go back to it and say, actually, look, this theme isn't working for me anymore. I'm going to switch it out with something else. Or I don't want to learn Japanese anymore. French is far more useful for me day to day. I'm going to learn French instead. The point is, there should be that flexibility built in. So if something does happen, don't panic, don't scrap the plan. It is not all to waste. You can just switch in a little box and switch out a little box, and you can just help to reassess where you are at different points. You don't have to stick to an entire ultimate goal. You don't have to do anything you've written on paper. It's there to help you think through the process and have something there that keeps you accountable. So what I'll do, I think it's going on YouTube afterwards, so you'll be able to flick back and pause on the plan if you want to have a look, but I can also share a graphic that might help people fill it in themselves if we want to afterwards. But the point is, structure it how you want, but getting it down on paper is the important thing. So my final slide, I'm just going to have a really quick plug. John is going to go through some absolutely fantastic resources for you to be able to build your career and build that development plan. But I'm going to nip in very quickly and say, if you are looking for training, we built a catalogue which is online, which has about 500 courses on. So you can click on that and search for courses that might be relevant. There might be something for you in there. It's called the Space Training Catalogue. So very easy to Google. I will finish there and pass it over to John.
Excellent. Thank you for those. There's some very good tips there, and I'll try and pick up on one or two of the pointers that you gave in the next couple of charts, and then we'll move to Q&A. If you have got any questions, please pop them in the Q&A box and we'll address them all at the end. So what is the PNT, Positioning, Navigation, Timing market? Where can you find out more about it? Well, the resource that I would point everybody to for starters is this EUSPA market report. It covers Earth observation and GNSS, and it's available free online. There's a lot of information in it, and the scope of the markets is so broad. So that's one thing I want to support from what Heidi said. It's impossible for any of us to be an expert in all of these areas, or even in most of these areas. So making choices is a really key part of any development planning that you may do. And also, on the flip side, don't beat yourself up if there's a whole load of things you don't feel you know very much about. I'll come back to that in a minute, but that's perfectly normal. But having a prioritized view of what you want to achieve and where you want to focus your time and effort, and your career as well, quite frankly, is always a good start. And as Heidi said, it can always change, but it's good to have that view up front. And this report, I would commend it to you. Have a look at it. I think it would help you to structure your thinking on the different sectors. And there's a ton of information. Here's just an example of the value chain generically, but they have different value chains for each sector, and within that, some of the key companies under each sector. And if I just flip to a Chrome browser, yeah, you can see on here, there's the front page. You just click here to download the report. And there it is, 216 pages, stuffed full of information. Admittedly, it is focused on satellite navigation rather than the broader positioning, navigation and timing, but it's got an awful lot of information. Here's an example of market outlook, market forward view. Of course, it's not going to be precisely accurate, but I think the methods that they've used gives it good credibility, and it is quite widely used. And as important as anything, it's just available free to anybody who wants to go there. So that's my number one. In terms of the market, do take a look at the EUSPA or USPA market report. This chart, you may have seen something like this before. The terminology that's used widely is SOSA, System of Systems Architecture. So to achieve some sort of resilience in position, navigation and timing, most people don't just rely on one positioning source. And as we know, satellite derived position and time has its vulnerabilities. So if you've got a critical application or an application which has got some commercial importance or safety aspect, then you're going to be choosing a number of different technologies. And again, you cannot be expected to be experts on all of them. Also adding into the mix are the different vulnerabilities. Here's just a classic graphic, if you like, of the different vulnerability types. Some are man-made, some are naturally occurring, some are on the up, some are somewhat stable. But a lot of people are very interested in these, and getting some level of knowledge on these is probably going to be part of your plan, I would suggest. And I think this one links to what Heidi was saying about the levels. This is a slightly different view, but there are only going to be a few experts in a particular technology type or a particular sector or a particular technique or approach. And the pyramid shape of this indicates that I think it's reasonable to be aware of an awful lot, and focus then in on the areas that you want to have, perhaps you could call them higher level or more expert skills, and celebrate the ones where you've got into more depth, rather than a naturally human tendency, which is to beat yourself up for things you don't know. I call it the peeling the onion or diving into the onion. So the outer layer, if you like, is awareness. You've got sort of a broad awareness, but there are only a few areas that you're going to be able to realistically go into more detail. So figuring out which ones interest you most, or which ones have got the most growth or the most potential, or you're most interested in the companies or organizations associated with them, I think is something that you can do, and I would encourage you to do it. And if you look at the market report that I just mentioned, I think that should give you some pointers. If you're floundering a bit, feels a bit overwhelming, you'll get a feel just by flicking through there as to which you're most connected to or which you're most interested in. And I would encourage you to try and make those choices up front. So to finish off, I've just got a few of my favorite resources. In fact, I'll switch back to the browser. Well, I can start with the Royal Institute of Navigation, and I'll end with the Royal Institute of Navigation, but we'll have some other stuff in the middle. So there are, if you are a member of the RIN, and on our website, you'll find various members-only information. And if you're a student in full-time education, it's actually very inexpensive to join. So it just a few pounds per year. Or if your organisation is an associate, a university affiliate of the RIN, then it's actually free for you to join. So if you want tips and techniques on how to join, you can find that under the membership tab here. But on the member, there are some members only webinars, and some of those are actually quite deep training courses on resilience, vulnerabilities, and how to go through a process to rationalize what level of performance you want, what your risks are, and how to build a more resilient and higher performing system. So that's worth looking at. Open to everybody is the YouTube channel of the RIN, which we've built up over the last few years. Typical YouTube structure, but I point you for this purpose to the playlists, and within that there's a course that's available openly, and I hope and believe a lot of other information and content that you will find potentially of use. If you want to go into more detail, here's one of my personal favorites. So we'll share these links with you after the event. We'll share a PDF of the presentations, and that will have embedded links in. But this course, GPS, an Introduction to Satellite Navigation by Frank van Diggelen of, well, he works for Google now, Dr. Frank van Diggelen, and Per Enge, the late and great Per Enge, really go into great detail about how the system works and the different aspects to performance. And it's very accessible, very watchable, and I commend it to everybody. The next one looks extremely unpromising, but is actually a mine of wonderful information. So if you're not familiar with the gps.gov website, it's well worth a visit. But where to look? Well, you have to dive down a few levels. In my suggestion anyway, is to dive down a few levels. And if you go under possibly one of the less promising tabs, which is governance, and then you dive down there to organization, and then you dive down the next list, it is a little bit hidden, to these bottom two, advisory board and the so-called CGSIC. There is a ton of information under each of these tabs. So the advisory board is one I would recommend to you in particular. They meet several times a year, and it's a group of experts who advise the US on what they should be interested in, what they should be worried about, what they could do better, what they could do more of. And their proceedings are an absolute mine of fascinating information. So if you dive in down here, you can see there's years worth of meetings. As an example, if we look at the last one, well, there are PDFs of many of the presentations. And, some of them are by world-renowned, looking at that list there, I think it's fair to say they're all by world-renowned experts. These presentations are an absolute mine of fascinating information prepared by experts for expert review. So I really recommend this gps.gov governance tab to you. And then finally for now, but do ask any questions if you've got more areas you'd like to know about. On the RIN website, it's our turn to hide stuff a bit. So on the resources tab at the moment, there's a resources portal for resilient positioning, navigation, timing. You can sign up for updates. And there's information under these 5 different sections. And if you click on these areas, it's really signposting, but there are plenty of links out to use what we believe are useful resources. So there's another useful portal, which I hope you would find of use. Just go back to the PowerPoint. I've been through all of those. Oh, excuse me. Few links there. The ones I haven't covered are there's a LinkedIn group called GNSS Vulnerabilities, which you can, if you're not already in there, it might be worth taking a look at it, seeing what content they've got, and you can apply to join that group. And there are plenty of magazines, but the two that I use the most over the last 15-20 years, I've been looking at navigation, GPS World and Inside GNSS. I'd take a look at those if you're not already familiar with them. They do have a good roundup. Other publications are available, and I'm not associated with any of these magazines, but I do find those two to be particularly useful. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks and hand back to Claire.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, both. Those were some really great insights, and I hope that our audience have found those helpful for their future careers. So just a reminder to everyone, you can pop any questions that you have in the Q&A and I will read them out on your behalf. So the first question is whether you have any advice on balancing lecture style courses versus the on-the-job style skills learning while working full-time. I'm not sure who's best placed to answer that. Maybe Heidi?
I can kick off, I think. I think the challenge is always with lecture style courses, you want to make sure that you've not just listened in the background, but you've kind of made active use of that knowledge. So it can be quite hard if you're working full time to sit down on lectures and think about how am I going to then thirdly apply this in real life. But I think my advice would be, if you can take anything you have learned and either make it into flashcards, for example, so you are actively employing some of your knowledge. It might not be you can apply it kind of on the job, but you can then kind of revise it throughout the day. There's a website or kind of an app called Anki Deck So if you watch one of the RIN webinars and make keynotes and put that into your flashcards, you'll be able to kind of remember some of the key points from those lecture style courses very easily. But I'd say if you can, on the job is always a challenge if you're working full-time in another area. I'm not 100% sure how you would apply specific things, but I think always think about how can you pick up different skills from it and make a note of them and evidence what you've been doing.
Okay, good stuff. From my side, I can relate to that question very much. If I just think back personally for me, I have done a mix, and I've just reflecting on them as Heidi was talking, I can see value in both training courses that you go to for half a day or a day or even a few days in person, but right up to multi-year study. So I did do an MBA in the middle of my career, I suppose, or earlier mid part of my career. And I struggled with the question that you ask, which is, blimey, how on earth am I going to fit this in? And will it be for me? So I actually chose to do it in a slow route. I did a certificate and then a diploma because I wasn't sure if it was going to be for me. And as it happened, it was. And I carried on for another few, I think 5 years altogether. But that's how I had to do it, to allow me to do that with full-time work, and at that time having a young family as well. And it wasn't too onerous, actually. Although I did get a parking ticket when I was driving back from one of the a red light camera ticket when I was driving back from one of the exams. So my mind must have been very much elsewhere. But on the whole, it wasn't too stressful. But today there are so many more online resources, and I think my advice in assessing the resources available to you, whatever format they are, is to be really critical of what you read. So I'll give it an example, quick example with a conference. If you're looking at going to a conference, the ones I've found useful are the ones that when you read the description, you think that conference is for me. It's exactly what I want to hear about, learn about. It's aligned with what I want to know more about. It's got the people I want to see there. If for a minute you're thinking, well, I'm sitting on the fence, I'm not sure about this conference or training program, in my experience, those are the ones that are not such a good use of your time. And if you want to give them a go, I'd find a way to dip your toe in by perhaps doing an online view or viewing a webinar or something like that, just to see what it's all about. So there's no perfect answer, but that's my attempt to answer that question.
Thank you very much. And just because you just touched on conferences there, John, can we maybe just follow up with maybe some advice on how people who are early in their career or who are still in university should approach conferences? You know, what would you advise they do at a conference to get the most out of it? Sort of networking versus sessions and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, good question. Shall I have a go at that one first, Heidi? Again, there's no perfect answer. The thing I would say throughout my own experience is that the concept of going to a conference, and even worse, presenting at a conference and being a bit sort of, oh, blimey, is that really for me? That feeling doesn't go away. And then when you turn up at the conference that you've booked yourself on and you're about to walk into these so-called icebreaker receptions, you know, if you're feeling, oh my goodness, I'm not sure that I'm really going to see anybody I know, and I don't know what this is going to be like, and I really want to turn around and run back home, that's all perfectly normal stuff. So give it a go for sure. I think there are different types. Well, there are different types of conference. So dipping the toe in the water, I think, is what I would recommend to get you going. So to go to a more local conference, or to a shorter conference, or perhaps one that is targeted at early career people and people still studying and researching. The RIN runs one of those called Next Gen Nav, for example. In fact, it's on next week. Yeah, to start there is probably worth doing. But equally, if you prepare well to talk at an international conference or a peer-reviewed technical conference, you have absolutely nothing to worry about, in my experience. I'm not a deep technical expert, but I have presented at these conferences with my level of knowledge. And by preparing well, I've always found it to be a rewarding experience, and you generally get good questions and good feedback. And the only other tip I'll share is that at the conferences, I always try to meet 2 or 3 new people each day, and just go up to them and say, the ideal is looking for somebody who's also standing on their own, and walk up to them and just say, hi, how are you doing? What brings you here? What's your interest in whatever the conference is about? And it's always interesting who you meet by doing that. So that's my attempt to answer your question. Thank you.
I think I absolutely agree with the going and asking questions and the actions that you can do in advance to be prepared. So particularly around networking, a lot of people turn up at events and, like John said, you think, oh my goodness, who am I going to talk to? It's nerve-wracking, it's scary. But if you can, maybe on the train on the way up, think about 3 or 4 questions which are quite interesting to ask someone else. People often find that they can talk about themselves quite easily. And if you show interest in them and their work, they're going to open up and share a lot with you at that event. So kind of having that preparedness can really help. And equally, you could look up the companies that are exhibiting and kind of maybe find out a little bit about what they do. So when you go to their stand or you meet someone that works for that company, you have a little bit more knowledge that you can maybe start or base that conversation on, and kind of every bit of preparedness that you can do really helps. It doesn't have to be a huge amount, but having a couple of things prepared can do good. And especially don't worry about writing things down in a notebook in advance, and actually having that notebook with you. Loads of people have notebooks. It's absolutely normal and fine.
Thanks, Heidi. Yes, anything to just give yourself the extra little bit of a confidence boost to actually ask the questions is great. Heidi, in your presentation, you mentioned briefly the space training catalogue. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about that, please? So the range of opportunities, what sort of levels they might be, geographic area that they might be appropriate for, that sort of thing.
Sure. So space training catalogue is something that we've built over the last few years from collecting essentially all available information about space-related training that there is online. It's free to access. The courses aren't necessarily free. They've all got a price or free listed, but they cover a huge range, both geographically and in terms of topics. So most of the courses are UK focused, or courses that people from the UK can access. But there are ones in there that you might be able to do that are based in the States, so they're kind of distance learning courses, or across Europe that you might be able to travel to or equally access via a distance course as well. But they do cover a huge range. Just on the screen, there's human factors in space from an astronaut trainer and space law. So there's a couple that this came up on the front page, but there is PNT, there's things related to defense, there are lots related to the applications of space-related data, and also things like systems engineering. So it is a really broad space range, but it's open and free. And if there's any training that you notice we're missing, there's a button that says add training, and you're welcome to kind of add it in there, and they will highlight the training in there. And I believe that a lot of the courses from the RIN are listed in there too.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Heidi. And unless we have any more questions coming through, I'll just ask one more. So I know people are obviously aware of different online job boards like Indeed and those sort of things. Are there any PNT specific job board websites or hubs that either of you are aware of?
No, I'm not actually. PNT is quite a nice community. Claire mentioned that I spent the first part of my career in SATCOMs and communications more generally, which is very, very broad and quite distributed. Whereas the the positioning, navigation, timing community, it does feel like it's easier to network and get connected to people, and sort of figure out the structure of the industry in the areas you're interested in. I think that would be my advice, is to work on, if you're looking to move around or move on within that sector, I would probably recommend to focus on LinkedIn, because there are, I mentioned one of the groups, the vulnerabilities group, but there are other groups on LinkedIn, and although they're not in any way job boards, the people, I think, you will find are very approachable, and I would recommend that you try and build your connectedness. Would be my advice. The individual companies, of course, have got their own job boards on their own websites, and there are plenty of jobs available. And just to round off my comments, going back to Heidi's plan, another technique you can use to inform your development plan is to find a few jobs that you'd really like in a few years' time, and then kind of structure your development plan to give you the skills and experience so that you could achieve a credible application for those roles. That's it.
Thanks, John. Heidi, do you have anything to add?
Equally, I don't think there's a specific PNT jobs board I know of, but there are some more general sites that these sorts of roles often come up on that are space related. There's things like space individuals, space careers, space defense jobs. All of them have a kind of flavor of PNT in them at some point, so they might be worth checking out as well.
Super, thank you. Great, so I think we will wrap it up there. I can't see any more questions coming through. So thank you so much again to John and Heidi for some great presentations and help and advice and some really useful answers. I hope everyone has got a huge amount from it, and we will circulate the link to the recording with everyone and the various links that we have featured throughout the presentation, so you'll have all of those easy to access. Thank you everyone again for joining. Once we send the recording, you can feel free to share that with your colleagues if you think anyone who wasn't available today would find that of help. As John mentioned, we do have a mini conference coming up next week called Next Gen Nav. So if you do fancy trying to network with similar people, then please do come along. That will be in Cranfield, and you can find more about that on our website, rin.org.uk. I also just want to quickly mention that one of the annual awards that the RIN has is called the WGP Lamb Award, and that is for a contribution to a more navigable world from a younger person. So if you or anyone you know might be eligible for that, please do have a look on our website. I'll share the link to that in the email that we send afterwards. So thank you so much once again. We hope to see you at another one of our Navigate Your Future webinars in the future, and have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.